Okay, this video is part 4 of quotes of Plato. So Plato's quote here, the first humans were all men. Those that led inferior lives were reincarnated as women and animals. So this idea of reincarnation comes from Pythagoras. Pythagoras was the first vegetarian. He was this ancient Greek genius. He did a lot of mathematics, the Pythagorean theorem. He recommended the vegetarian diet because he thought that humans were going to be reincarnated possibly as animals, and you don't want to eat an animal that might be some reincarnated person's soul. And of course the Greeks thought that women were inferior to men, and so that's one of Plato's quotes. Here's what Plato says about other countries in comparison with Greece. Egypt and Phoenicia loved money. The special characteristic of the Greeks is to love knowledge. The Greeks viewed anybody as that was non-Greek as a barbarian. And it's pretty common any culture views anybody who's not part of their culture as, lower than them in some way. Barbarian came from, they said when somebody's non-Greek spoke, it sounded like baba, barbarian. Okay, Plato's quote. Philosophy is the love of learning and the love of wisdom. Philosophy is about learning to question well. It teaches us to become better thinkers. And he's right. That habit of the Socratic dialogue, Socratic questioning, working down to the truth through a series of questions that asymptotically approach the truth, that's valuable. And he says dialogue with others is helpful as they help to point out your assumptions. That's true too. Everybody knows that you have a conversation with a smart friend and they'll tell you, aren't you assuming this and this? And you can figure out the strength and weakness of your argument so you prepare it better. Like before you give a presentation, it's a great thing to do to run it by a friend. Okay, sometimes like when I want to write a book, I'll give a video lecture first. I'll see what feedback I get, if it gives me any ideas, and then I can make the book better. Okay, Plato, the direction in which education starts a man will determine his future life. Yeah, that's why I think public schools are so bad. They basically waste your time from kindergarten through senior year of high school, and you just lost, 12 years of your life, running around like a stupid conformist idiot when you could have been developing a skill. You could have learned Greek, you could have learned Latin, you could have learned some other useful language, you could have learned how to draw, how to play a musical instrument, all kinds of good things. Instead you sat around, in a public school listening to some lady blah 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 from the manuscript recipe for creating dummies. Okay, all right, Plato continues. When men speak ill of you, live in such a way that no one will believe them. Knowledge that is acquired under compulsion obtains no hold on the mind. That is true. Kind of goes with some quotes by Confucius and Alan Bloom. Okay. Plato, necessity is the mother of invention. Okay. And then there's something called the Socrates problem. And what that was about was that, Socrates, like some other famous philosophers and men, like Buddha, Confucius, also like Jesus Christ, they never wrote their own books. So you have to know about them through the writings of other people. Aristophanes, the playwright, wrote the play The Clouds, where he mocked Socrates, said he was just like other sophists. Xenophon is sort of a military guy and a bit of a historian. He wrote a bit about Plato. Plato himself, a bit about Socrates. Plato eulogized, almost, he was such a fan of Socrates, his teacher. But, and then Aristotle, he respected Socrates, but he was not as big a fan as Plato. The early dialogues by Plato are thought to be a more accurate representation, like the Apologia, the defense of Socrates at his trial and his death. And that's one of the things Plato wanted to do. He wanted to vindicate Socrates. He felt Socrates, of course, had been unfairly sentenced to death, which he was unfairly. And Socrates is known since then as the great martyr of philosophy, the saint of philosophy. Socrates, quote here, mankind is ignorant of the most important thing, which is how he should conduct his life, and that he should live virtuously, so that he may preserve his soul and attain happiness. All right, when man is virtuous, he is happier. So anyways, that's very Christian sounding, isn't it? And again, he did say a lot of things that remind you of Christ. Okay. When Socrates was at his trial for disrespecting the gods and corrupting the youth of Athens, he was given a chance to defend himself. And he said, instead of sentencing me to death, you should give me free meals every day, which Athens did for some of its heroes. And this sort of enraged members of the jury, and even more of them voted to sentence him to death than had at the initial verdict. Okay. Alcibiades, the great warrior, general, kind of crazy, good-looking Greek soldier said, Socrates is unique. There is no one else like him. There never was anyone like him, and there never will again be anyone like Socrates. He is a magician with words. Plato's early career dialogues were things like the Apologia, the defense of Socrates, and that's probably more accurate in his description of Socrates. Middle career things like Symposium, he would gradually sort of wax eloquent using Socrates as his mouthpiece. His later dialogues were sort of his, legacy, philosophic, ethical books like Timaeus. And in the School of Athens, back here in this picture of my background, the Timaeus is the one that's featured. And, the Plato's Timaeus, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, these were things used in schools for over 1,000 years. For over 1,000 years, 1,500 years, the foundation of education was the works of Plato and Aristotle. Rhetoric is the art of ruling men. And I can tell you, mankind was better educated when they were taught based on Plato and Aristotle than they are today. Anybody who really knows education, people should be studying the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans and the Renaissance and the Belle Epoque. The Belle Epoque meaning the 1800s, really from around, let's say, 1790, or let's just say 1800 to 1915. That was the high water mark of Europe. It's an extraordinary time. I made videos about the art from that time. Okay, at the Symposium, it was actually a party for the playwright who had won the Drama of the Year contest named Agathon. Here's a quote from Agathon. Even God cannot change the past. That's a pretty big statement. And so you say to yourself, is the cow, the moon, and then what comes next is word is the East party stronger than, in that sense, more powerful than God, because they can rewrite history. Whereas God can't change history. I guess he could rewrite it if he wanted. He could do whatever he wants. But I'm saying is we've all had that daydream. That's one of my favorite daydreams. I go back to when I was young and I change how I handle some situation. I don't come back so early and I don't injure my shoulder and I could wrestle. I'd be a wrestling coach right now instead of doing this. Anyways, let's see. Plato, rhetoric is the art for ruling the minds of men. It's the way to communicate more effectively. Plato, serious things cannot be understood without laughable things. Okay. Ayn Rand, the only purpose of education is to teach a student how to live his life. By developing his mind and equipping him to deal with reality, he has to be taught to think. He has to be taught the essentials of knowledge discovered in the past, and he has to be equipped to acquire future knowledge by his own effort. Yeah, that's why study skills is like one of the most basic, important things a person could learn, but it's not taught in the schools. I've never in my life met a single student. I've asked hundreds of them, did you ever get taught study skills in grade school or high school? Not a single one, which is another proof of how bogus public schools are. Okay. John Taylor Gatto, whatever an education is, it should make you a unique individual, not a conformist. It should furnish you with an original spirit with which to tackle the big challenges. It should allow you to find values, which will be your roadmap through life. It should teach you what is important, how to live. And like I said, we know how to live. We learn from Christianity. Okay, Christianity teaches all those morals, moral foundation, and ethics. Okay. Socrates, if you make a transition in small steps from anything to its opposite, you will be more likely to escape detection than if you proceed in a great leap. Yeah, what I've seen is you'll take an institution that used to be good, like Harvard University, and then you corrupt it with all these modernist, bogus things, and all of a sudden you turn the great Harvard University, a religious college, into an atheistic Darwin piece of crap joke of a place. Okay, that's what's happened. Socrates, to not be deceived, one must know accurately the similarity and dissimilarity of things. Okay, we just got a couple more quotes here. Socrates, no one can transfer knowledge directly to a student. The most that can be done is to encourage the student to think by asking them a series of questions and so cause the student to learn the material for themselves. Plato, the beginning of a work is the most important part. Let's see. Plato did recommend eugenics, selective breeding in humans. He felt the best man should be bred with the best women. He felt infanticide should be performed on children that were defective. He felt that if the parents were inferior, he thought they were lowlifes, that they should be more likely to have their children infanticided. So Plato was sort of brutal. He was so pissed off about Athens losing to Sparta that he started to accept a lot of ideas from Sparta that I think most people would not like today. He felt the guardians of Athens should share their wives communally and not know whose children were whose, because he wanted them to not have any ties like that was going to lead to simony or anything. He wanted them to just be these altruistic, open-minded rulers of. And his idea of the philosopher kings, the guardians, so to speak, it never happened. It was this utopian theory of what the perfect society would be, written about in his dialogue, Plato's Republic. Okay, here's a Plato quote. God proclaims as a first principle to rulers, and above all else, that there is nothing that they should be so anxious to guard, or of which they should be such guardians, as the purity of the race. Okay, so this idea of racial purity, of eugenics, of only the best should breed with the best, that's been around a long time. It was around before Plato. He just celebrated it, and so I can tell you, that's been around a long time. Okay, Plato invented the concept of the city of Atlantis as a contrast to his ideal republic. Okay, some people think Atlantis was a real city. No, it wasn't a real city. It was another one of his allegorical metaphors. Plato forbid poets from the ideal utopian city because he felt too often they corrupted people, like his idea of the cave. But then again, you got to recognize how he just wanted to tell his own stories and let that be the guide. So he wants to be the controller himself. All right, he says, the people have no understanding and they only repeat what their rulers are pleased to tell them. Those who tell the stories rule the society. The first thing will be to establish a censorship of writers of fiction and to let the censors receive any tale of fiction which is good and to reject the bad. And we will desire mothers and nurses to tell their children the authorized versions only. So mothers should only be allowed to tell their children what he authorizes, and him and the guardian philosopher king. So he wants to be the controller. All fiction and nonfiction is censored in the interest of the ruling class, per George Orwell. Okay, wherever there is an enforced orthodoxy, good writing stops. Yeah, because you're not allowed to tell the truth about stuff. Orthodoxy for the proles is unconsciousness. Okay, two last quotes by Plato. When a tyrant first appears, he is always proclaimed to be the protector. Yes. Democracy passes into despotism. Yes. Anyways, that's it for videos on Plato. Hope you found those helpful.